Hello everyone, I hope all of you are doing good, and today I am here with How Do Organisms Reproduce Class 10th Science. This is Roshni from LearnoHub, the free learning platform where you can study anything and everything about math, science, social science, tips and tricks and motivational videos absolutely for free at learnohub.com. So how do organisms reproduce? Well, reproduction is a very essential part or an essential life process for any living organism. This is the process by which every living organism produces more and more organisms similar to themselves. And in fact, that's the reason you would have seen that a baby elephant looks exactly like the elephant, right? If not exactly, at least they all look similar. Similarly, when we look at human beings, all the human beings, they share a lot of common things, right? They do not look like birds, or birds do not look like maybe elephants, right? So everybody, they have their own traits, their own features, own characteristics, and they keep producing organisms which are similar to themselves. And that's reproduction. Now, trying to understand how reproduction happens, how do organisms reproduce, is not a very simple thing. So we really need to understand it in more detail, and that is why we will cover this entire chapter in 8 videos, because it's not a very short and sweet lesson. So we really need to do a detailed study. But be with me, because you will understand how do organisms reproduce like never before. So are we all ready to start learning? Let's get started. So let us start with what is reproduction. So before we go ahead with anything, we should first get clear with the process, what it is. It is the process by which living organisms produce new organisms similar to themselves, right? Now, when I say similar to themselves, what do I mean by similar to themselves? Does that mean that any organism which gives birth to a new organism, that organism is always going to be similar to the parent? Is it like that? Let's look at some of the examples. Have you ever noticed that the baby elephant, it resembles the elephant, right? Even if not exactly, but at least by looking at the baby elephant, you can say that, okay, an elephant has given birth to this baby. The baby of an elephant will not look like a lion, right? Why is it that? Because in this process of reproduction, organisms are going to produce the new organisms similar to themselves. Similarly, for a human being, the baby has similarities of the parents. First of all, the baby will look similar to a human being. I mean, it will have all the features like a normal human being. On top of that, they will have similarities to their parents. For example, you would have seen, even for any one of us, we look very similar to our parents. Some of us look exactly like our father. Some of us look very similar to our mom. Some of us look very different from both of them. So, but in most of the cases, there are some similarities with the parents. Now, how much is the similarity and how much is the difference? That again depends. That depends on many different things, which we will talk as we gradually go ahead with the lesson. So, similarly, here you can see different living organisms and their respective babies. So, here you can see the baby of a giraffe looks very similar to the giraffe. Similar is the case for a fish. The baby fish looks quite similar to the mommy fish. Right? So, reproduction is a process where a living organism will produce new organisms similar to themselves. Now, whether it is going to be exactly similar or somewhat similar, that depends on many other factors. Right? So, we are clear with what is reproduction. So, now the question is, why is reproduction necessary? So, anyways, in the first slide, I already gave you an idea that how would it be if there is no reproduction at all. Right? So let us see once again the reasons which justify the necessity of reproduction. The reproduction retains a particular species of living organisms. That's what I just discussed in the first slide, right? So if there is no reproduction, that particular species will become extinct. For example, if we consider, say, if we consider the lions, let us suppose if the lions stop reproducing, if there are no new lions being born, what will happen? After a couple of years, a day will come when all the lions who are existing now, they all will die and there will be no lions at all. Right? So reproduction helps in maintaining a particular species. Transmission of characters from one generation to the next. So reproduction also plays a role here. So that's what I was discussing some time back, that we would have noticed that there are similarities seen in us which are quite similar to our parents. So what is happening? So the characters or the traits are getting transferred from one generation to the other. For example, we would have seen that we look very similar to our parents. Our parents, maybe our father looks very similar to our grandparents. Similarly, our grandfather looks very similar to his parents. Parents means any of his parents. Maybe the similarity is with the father or the similarity is with the mother or a mix of them. So here in this picture you can see here a couple and their two kids. So if you look at the kids, this kid has got black hair which is very similar to his father. So he got this trait from his father, whereas the other kid got brown hair which is similar to the mother. So he inherited it from the mother. So this transmission of characteristics from one generation to the next, this is known as inheritance. And this inheritance happens because of reproduction. If there is no reproduction, there will be no inheritance. Right? So that means there are some characters which are not only the species is retained, certain characters are also retained. For example, in this case, this guy had black hair, right? Now, since he reproduced, that means since this couple gave birth to children, so this child also has black hair. Now, when this child grows up and he gets married and again he gives birth to his children, maybe one of his children will again have black hair. So, black hair is nothing but a trait or a character. So, this black hair is also getting transferred or transmitted from one generation to the other. So, reproduction not only retains the species, so here it is retaining the human species as a whole. On top of that, it also helps to retain a particular character from one generation to the next generation. And this transmission of characters is known as inheritance. Variations lead to the origin of new species. So here is an interesting term here, variations. So here this second point was talking about inheritance. Now, you might be interested to know that how this inheritance happens. How is it that the black hair trait got transferred from the father to the son? So that is actually a very interesting topic to discuss. But however, in this lesson, we will focus our study only on the process of reproduction. How a new organism is born, how a new organism is actually formed. So we will focus on that. We will talk about this inheritance and also about variations in our next lesson. But for now, I need to tell you something. I need to explain you something about variations. What is variation? Variation, the word variation means difference, right? Something which is different. Now, in this case, in this example of the couple, do you notice something? That the two children, they inherited some characters from the father, they inherited some characters from their mother, but there are some characters which are neither inherited from the father nor inherited from the mother. So it is a new character which the child has developed. For example, if you look at this child, he has got such big eyes, right? So do you think that his dad had big eyes? No. Do you think the mom has big eyes? No. So big eyes is something which is different from both the parents. So that means it is a new character which has come out of this reproduction. So these kind of differences are known as variations. That means something which is different. Something which was not supposed to happen, but something had happened. Some new thing which come out of reproduction, that is known as variations. And these variations are extremely helpful in the long run. How? That's because gradually with such variations, now as I said, so now big eyes is one variation. I mean, none of them had, but by chance this child got it. Now when this child grows up and he gets married, he gives birth to his children, maybe one of his children might have big eyes, right? Because that time he is the parent. So one of his children might have big eyes. Correct? Now along with those big eyes, maybe they have some character which is again different from their parents. Maybe they will have some other new thing. Maybe they can have thick lips, right? Now gradually with such new changes over a period of time, it might happen that it results in a new species altogether. So now when I take this example of human beings, it might become quite unbelievable for you that how come such small variations can give rise to a new species altogether. So instead of taking this example, let us look at the example of dogs. So here on the screen you can see a variety of dogs, right? All of them are dogs. But do you think that all of them look similar to each other? No, right? So all of them have got different features, different characters and different traits, but they are all dogs. So now this is nothing but a result of variations, right? Because maybe it all started with one single dog. Maybe there was just one variety of dog sometime long back, right? So maybe that dog reproduced. So two dogs mated and they reproduced. So when they reproduced, maybe there was some small variation, like maybe one of their children had big ears, right? Now when that dog again reproduced later, again maybe one of their children had some new character, that their children had big ears, and along with big ears, they also had a spotted body color, somewhat like this. So here you can see this dog has got big ears, this dog has got spotted color. So now when this process keeps continuing, because the process of reproduction keeps continuing, right? Now as the process continues, there are many new traits which come up, like big ear, or the spotted color, or maybe the furry body covered with furs. So there are a variety of characteristics which come up during this process of reproduction. Now, when after hundreds and hundreds of years, after a long time, what happens is that those new variations gradually end up in a new organism altogether. So here you can see, when you compare this dog with this one, even though both of them are dogs, but they are no way similar. They are completely different from each other. So we can say that because of the variations, because of the small variations in each generation, over a period of several years, sometimes it gives rise to a new species. So that is one advantage of variations. So here you understood what is variation. Variation is a new trait which comes in a children as a result of reproduction. So here the new trait is big eyes. So now when this reproduction continues, there are many such new traits which keep coming on the way. Now when all these new traits get accumulated, so over a period of several years, sometimes you end up getting an organism which is totally different from the organism you started the entire thing with. For example, here also in this case, if this guy gets married, if any of his children has big eyes and he also gets his complexion totally black, right? So his appearance will change completely. Now if again that guy gets married and he again gives birth to his children, so maybe one of his children gets big eyes and dark complexion, and on top of that maybe he's bald, doesn't have any hair. So just imagine how much the appearance is changing with time, because there are possibilities that people can get kids like that, because we don't know how exactly their features are going to be. So with passage of time, the kind of organism which we are getting, that is differing because of these small variations. So this is another significance of reproduction. So these are the three most important reasons because of which we say that reproduction is a very, very important process for all living organisms. First of all, for the survival of the living organisms on Earth. Secondly, for transmission of characters, so that the characters do not end up. The characters keep on going from one generation to the next generation. And the third is so that whenever reproduction happens, there will be some variations. And these variations in turn will give rise to new species in the long run. Clear? Okay. Now, how inheritance happens and how variations happen, we will discuss about these topics in our next lesson. So here we will not focus on these topics. Instead, our focus will be on how reproduction happens, how the new organisms are formed. So here in this slide, let us quickly see what exactly in a living organism is responsible for the inheritance and variation, which we were talking about just now. So when we are talking about inheritance and variation, it means that it is all about some characters which are getting passed to the new organism. So that means there is something which actually decides how the new organism is going to be. Right? So what is that something which decides that how the new organism will be? Now forget about living organism. Let us take a common example. Let us suppose there is a new car which is going to come up in the market, right? So how do you think that the car is actually made? How is the car actually designed? So do you think that any company who is coming out with this new car, they will just go and start assembling the parts and they'll start designing a car all of a sudden? It doesn't happen like that, right? So whenever you want to create or whenever you want to construct anything, whether it is a building, whether it is a tower, whether it is some roads or a shopping mall or whatever it is, before you actually start creating it or before you actually start constructing it, there has to be a blueprint. So what is a blueprint? It is nothing but a sketch which will give all the details about that particular object, its entire construction. So here you can see this is the blueprint of the car. It tells where the seat is going to be, how the appearance of the car should be from side view, the front view, the back view. So all the views and all the details are there in the blueprint. Now based on this blueprint, the car will actually be constructed, and that is how your end result will come, right? So this blueprint is nothing but a rough sketch or a diagram which will tell you how the car is going to look like or how the car is going to be, right? So similarly, when we are talking about reproduction, we are actually talking about the formation of a new organism. So there is a blueprint which actually decides how that new organism is going to be. If you take the example of human beings, so that means there is a blueprint in this case as well. When a human being gives birth to a new organism means a new baby, right? So what is it that actually decides, or what is that blueprint which decides how that child is going to be? Now, when you look at any human being, what is our body made up of? Our body is made up of cells. So a cell, if we look very closely, will look somewhat like this. Then inside the cell, we have the cell nucleus, right? Now if we observe this nucleus little more closely, it will look somewhat like this. So the nucleus will consist of another center, which is nothing but the nucleolus. So this is the nucleolus. And what are these thread-like structures which you see inside the nucleus? These are nothing but the chromosomes. Now, if we look at these chromosomes again little more closely, how will they look like? They will look somewhat like this. So here they are looking like threads, but if you look them really close, these threads also consist of some things inside it. So what are these? So the chromosomes are nothing but it is made up of two strands like structures. So what are they called? They are known as chromatids. So each strand is known as chromatid and they are joined together here. And this part which actually joins the two chromatids to form a chromosome is known as centromere. Now again, if you look at this chromatid little more closely, you see that there are some yellow colored structures here, right? You can see some yellow structures. So what are these? These are nothing but genes. Now if you look at a gene closely, you will see that it is made up of DNA. And DNA is the blueprint of the body. So this DNA actually decides how the body is going to be. So I think you got a hell lot of new terms suddenly. So what I'm trying to say is that inside every human body, we have cell. Inside the cell, we have nucleus. Inside the nucleus, we have chromosomes. And inside the chromosomes, we have gene. Inside the gene, we have DNA. And DNA contains the information for making proteins. DNA actually tells us what kind of proteins needs to be synthesized. So DNA actually is the one who has the information. Now, as the proteins vary, so the body design varies, because proteins are the ones which actually make up the entire human body. Even inside the cell, we talk about the cell organelles, we talk about mitochondria, we talk about lysosomes, this, that and all. So end of the day, everything, nothing, it is all about proteins, right? So when you look at the chemical composition of each and everything inside our body, you will see that everything is the same basic things, the same amino acids which join together to form different types of proteins, and they perform different types of function. So basically DNA decides what kind of proteins need to be made, and the different proteins, the different is the body design. Okay? So we can say that DNA is the blueprint of the body. So now if DNA is the one who decides, now you might be interested to know what is this structure. I mean, the structure of DNA looks quite interesting and you might have curiosity to understand it in detail. So we will talk about it, but not now. So what I'm trying to say now is, so what happens in reproduction? So for, let us suppose in case of human beings, when a baby is to be born, so who decides how that baby is going to be? So again, DNA decides, but whose DNA? Is it the father's DNA who decides how the baby is going to be, or is it the mother's DNA who is going to decide how the baby is going to be? Okay, so for reproduction, both the father's DNA and the mother's DNA, both of them contribute, right? So in that case, DNA copies are made. Like the father also, the father and the mother, both needs their DNA, right? Because they also wants to be alive. So a copy of father's DNA is made. Similarly, a copy of mother's DNA is made. Now these two DNAs combine together to form the child's DNA. So that is the basic idea. I am not getting into the detail of it. So now you are getting how that inheritance comes. So since the father's and the mother's DNA contribute to the child's DNA, so that means the blueprints of the parents are actually contributing to make the blueprint of the child. So it is very obvious that there will be inheritance, right? Because the DNA will actually decide how the child is going to be, and that is why we see that in reproduction, the new organism which is born is very similar to the parent organism. Because this is not only true for human beings, but it is true for all the living organisms. Because every living organism is made up of cell. Cells contain nucleus, nucleus contains chromosomes, and chromosomes contain genes, right? Now, sometimes when these DNA copies are made, so if exact DNA copy is made, in that case, the child will look exactly similar to the parent. But if the DNA copy which is made is little different than the parent's DNA, then the child will also be little different. So that in that case, the child will also have little variations, right? So now you understand how variation is related to DNA. So when the DNA copies are being made, if the exact copies are made, in that case, the child will be exactly similar to the parents. But while making that copy, if there is some mistake or if the copy is not exactly similar, in that case there will be a little variation in the child. So that is how we saw in the example, previous slide, that the child got big eyes. Big eyes was not there with the father nor with the mother. So it was a new trait. So this new trait came because while copying DNA, there was some difference which was different from both the father's DNA and the mother's DNA. Right? So this is the basic idea of inheritance and variation. So when we talk about inheritance and variation in detail, we will first understand the structure of DNA in detail. So we will leave that for the next lesson, because in this lesson we are already going to learn a lot of new things when we talk about the process of reproduction. So I do not want to mess up both the things here. So inheritance and variation we will keep for the next lesson. So DNA structure and detail also we will keep for the next lesson, because these are related things. So for now you understand that how reproduction is related to inheritance and variation. Okay. And because of this word gene, that is why you would have often heard that people say that it is genetic. For example, you would have heard somebody who is suffering from maybe high blood pressure. So that person often says that it is genetic for me, because my father also had high blood pressure, my grandfather also had high blood pressure, my great-grandfather also had high blood pressure. So what he's trying to say is this problem of BP has been transmitted from one generation to the other generation. Why is it called genetic? Because it is something which is carried by the gene. And who is in the gene who actually carries this information? It is the DNA. So DNA is actually carrying the information. And since DNA is present inside the gene, so from the word gene, people say things are, or the characters are genetic. That means it has been carried from the previous generation. Right? So now, I think by now, we have already understood what is reproduction and why reproduction takes place. Even though reproduction is not necessary for us to be alive, but still it serves very, very important purpose, and that is why a lot of energy is being spent for this process of reproduction. Now, let us quickly understand the significance of variation. However, I have told you before also that whenever there is some variation, over a period of time, over a period of a large number of years, this variation will actually give rise to a new species. So accumulation of variations over a period of time give rise to a new species. That is a very important aspect, because new species get generated. So I took the example of the dogs. So you see so many different varieties of dogs actually generated because of small variations. It also helps in the survival of a species over time. Now, how does it help in the survival of species? Now, let us suppose that with these variations, the dogs, they got many new traits, like they got fur over their bodies, they got the spotted body, they got long ears, they got short height. So, they got many different types of traits due to variation, right? Now, let us suppose if some environmental change comes into picture. Let us say something happens in the environment and the temperature of the area where the dogs are residing, that drops greatly. So that area suddenly becomes very cold. So what will happen? All of these dogs are not very used to staying in such cold climate. So what will happen? They will not be able to adjust themselves with that climate. So they will start dying, right? For example, for us human beings also, in the winter season, when we feel cold, what do? We wear sweaters, we wear jackets. Now let us suppose if you do not have a sweater at all, and if it becomes too cold, what's going to happen? We will not be able to bear that extreme cold. So a person can even die because of that much of cold. So the same things would have happened to these dogs also. When the temperature falls that badly, then all of them would have died. Now, since this variation was there, so there are some dogs who have got fur over their bodies. So now, even if the temperature drops drastically, Don't you think that this dog will be able to survive? Because he has got fur over his bodies, and fur gives a lot of warmth to the body. So this dog will be able to survive. So that ways we can say that since there was variation, so at least some dogs will be able to survive. So at least some organisms of that species is able to survive. If there were no variations, in that case, let us suppose if all this process of reproduction had started with a dog like this. So in that case, all the dogs would have been like this. They would have been identically similar to their parents. So there was no scope of variations. There was no scope of any new characters. So there was no scope of fur as well. So in that case, if the temperature would have fallen drastically, in that case, the dogs would have all died. So there would have been no animal called dog on this earth. But in this case, at least the dogs with fur will be able to survive. Right? So at least some variety of dogs will be there. So when some variety will be there, so the process of reproduction will again keep on happening. Now as the process will happen, again some new dogs will be produced. Again they will have some new variations, and gradually again we will get new species of dogs. Right? So that way is also it helps in the survival of a species over time. It doesn't allow extinction of a species. Right? So that is the significance of variation.
I hope you found this entire series on reproduction or how do organisms reproduce useful. If you have a feedback to share, do let us know in the comment section. If you really liked the video, you should share it with your friends so that they can enjoy the video too. I will see you all very soon with a new video with a new topic. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.